And welcome to the Quickfire presentations with the University of Manchester Library and the Computer History Museum. I'm Dan Lewin. I'm the CEO of the Computer History Museum. And first, we're going to hear about how to bring Qing, China's multilingual empire exhibition, to life and the scaling up of Manchester digital collections at the University of Manchester Library. So I'm going to hand it off to Pete and ask him to introduce himself and kick off the program. So off to you, Pete.
Thanks, Daniel. Actually, it's me, Ian, who's going to kick things off, and then I'll hand over to Pete in a minute. So I'm Ian Gifford. I'm the head of digital development at the University of Manchester Library, and along with my colleague, Pete Morris, who's a full-stack software developer in my team, we're going to share some of the work that we did a little while back supporting our exhibitions team through the development of an interactive scroll viewer that dynamically pulled IIIF images from our digital collections platform. So I'm going to start by setting the scene and explain a little bit about the context we work in and the systems we work with. Then I'm going to hand over to Pete, who's going to give a demonstration of how we actually developed this approach and share some of the challenges we faced. So if I can actually get my slides to move across. Here we go. We both work within an embedded development team at the University of Manchester Library. So that includes software developers, senior software developers, and digital communications specialists. The University of Manchester Library is one of only 5 national research libraries in the United Kingdom. We have 11 library sites serving 40,000 students and 13,000 academic and professional services staff. And one of our sites is the John Rylands Research Institute and Library, which is home to over 250,000 printed works, over 1 million manuscripts and archival items, the oldest of which dates back to the 3rd millennium BC. The John Rylands Library was first commissioned in 1890 by Enriqueta Rylands in memory of her husband, John Rylands, who was a Victorian industrialist and philanthropist who owned the largest textile manufacturer in the country and left a vast fortune to his widow. And Enriqueta spent a few years amassing an impressive collection of works, chiefly the Spencer collection from the 2nd Earl of Spencer, who was a descendant of Lady Diana Spencer, and opened as a public library in 1899 as a gift to the people of Manchester. The library hosts permanent exhibits, including probably our most famous item, a fragment of St. John's Gospel, widely regarded as the earliest New Testament writing in existence, but also 2 rolling exhibitions a year. And the library's combined role of public visitor attraction and advanced research institute was formalized in 2021 with the creation of the John Rylands Research Institute and Library. So our team, as well as developing a wide range of systems in support of library staff and students, have been involved in developing digital experiences in support of the Rylands rolling exhibitions for a number of years now. And we have a digital kiosk situated in the exhibition space and use a software package called Intuiface to design and create interactive experiences in collaboration with our curators and academics. And in the past, these have included embedding curator videos. They've included various interactive presentations of objects and texts. They've included even multispectral image overlays on palimpsests and various other things of this nature. Our team also develop and support our digital collections platform known as Manchester Digital Collections. And this was developed in collaboration with Cambridge University based on their home-built image viewer application. It was launched in 2020, 2 months before the UK's lockdown, but against the odds, we were able to continue to grow the number of collections and now have 36 collections, including 4,000 items and over 200,000 images. And last September, we launched our first digital edition in the platform of the Mary Hamilton papers, which I'll talk a little bit about just to show what the platform can do. So just for context, Mary Hamilton was an 18th century courtier, diarist, and letter writer. And we've been supporting an international cross-disciplinary project working to bring her papers together and develop high-quality transcriptions of all her works. As part of the project, we worked on an improved collection view for the platform, which included the ability to search and filter by different parameters, such as class mark, title, author, date range, etc. But you can see here how the platform presents the high-quality IIIF images alongside rich TEI metadata. In addition to this, it also presents the high quality and interactive transcriptions of the letters. And we're continuing to work with Cambridge as part of a growing national consortium of institutions all using the same platform. And this finally brings us to Qing. And the Qing exhibition was actually our first exhibition after the lockdown. So there was a desire to do something a bit different, a bit more boundary stretching. And one of the highlights of the physical exhibition was this rather amazing 24-meter scroll depicting street celebrations of Emperor Kangxi's birthday. And the brief came in, could we please develop an interactive scroll viewer, including the ability to add various local hotspots? So we spent some time looking at whether we could use Interface to build this, but we had various problems managing the large number of high resolution images, which was causing lots of performance issues with the hardware that we use. We didn't have any budget at the time to improve the hardware or to buy an off-the-shelf solution, and we had to think of a different way to enable that experience. And this is the point I'm going to now hand over to Pete, who was the one who was tasked with finding a way to respond to this demanding request in a fairly short amount of time. We were working less within 2 months in order to actually bring the scroll to life. So I will hand over to Pete now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian. Yeah, so the Qing scroll, as I was presented it with, was 24 meters long, which is great until you want people to be able to look through it. And 24 meters is probably about the length of a swimming pool. So this is quite a long scroll for people to look through. And that was really the catalyst as to why a digital version was needed. And generally, if I'm making a digital image viewer, what we'd do is we would get all the photos and we put them all together into a single photo, and then you'd be able to zoom in on that, and we've got platforms for doing that. The problem is with 24 meters of high resolution photos, each photo is 6,500 pixels by 5,500 in the smallest of them. There's 140 of them. I did some maths earlier. When you actually crunch that all together, the image just in terms of pixels is 14 gigabytes. Now that's far too much that I can load into one of my image viewers, and certainly too much for one of our kiosks. So we needed to come up with a completely different way of doing this. And we needed to be able to source these as individual tiles and individual images rather than just trying to create one massive one. And the approach we want to use is similar to how Google Maps works. You don't have to download the whole of Google Maps onto your computer. You just zoom in on the bit you want to see, and you just see a tile that's relevant to you. So because of that, we use a system called OpenSeaDragon, which is part of Manchester Digital Collections, and that means that we don't have to worry about that big thing. It sorts out all of the tiling for us, but we still have to be able to get the original source image in, which brings us back to the same problem, square one. How do we get the original source image? So another way we can do it is to actually stack the tiles up. And we can give it 140 different tiles and say, here are all of the source images, create new tiles within that and send those out to everyone. And that's great, except your 140 tiles, you have to know exactly how to offset them against each other. And one of the problems that we encountered quite quickly was that the tiles, or so I should say, the snapshots that make up this massive scroll had been taken by hand using a camera on a rig. So they weren't exactly aligned up exactly the right way. And I'm going to share my screen quickly to give an example of that. So hopefully, if this goes according to plan, you should see a Qing tile alignment demo, as I'm calling it. So here are 4 of the individual high resolution snapshots. I've made them small so we can all see what's going on, but these would actually be very high resolution. And I can drag these around to sort of align them roughly on top of each other, but it's difficult to get it exactly right, because when we're looking at high resolution, we've really got to get these in the right places, and they don't easily stack up. So the question was, how do we automate this? How do we tell it how to position these, the X, Y coordinates for each of these, without having to sit down and manually calculate them all manually? And the way that I've decided to do this eventually is easier to show if I move out of the Qing scroll and move on to a photo of John Rylands itself. So here's a photo of John Rylands, same 4 tiles I'm going to use. And on this one, I can again drag them around, same as before. But the question is, how do we do that automatically? And the way we decided to do that is that if you drag these on top of each other, you can actually work out which one is different from the other. So if I tell it to subtract one image from the other image, then you get a sort of like an inverted negative image taking place. And if you add up how many pixels are different from the other, you get a score. So as it is at the moment, the current score it's got is 68.8, and the best one we've had so far is 57.7. If I drag this around a little bit, those numbers will change. And the idea is, as you get closer and closer to where it's supposed to overlap, depending on how good my mouse is, the number gets down quite low. And if I'm lucky and can get it bang on, which I might not be able to, we'll give it a try. No, I don't think we're not going to waste time doing it. The closer I get, basically, the closer it'll get to it. And then when we turn the negative back off, you end up with something that's nicely aligned up, and you have a single photo, even though it's been created from 2 different offsets. When we put all of these together, and to use the proverbial phrase, here's one I made earlier, I've calculated all of these by dragging them around using that same approach and noted them down. And then when we perform that, go on top of each other, these will be completely black because they obviously, the pixels subtract from each other. But once we turn that off and put the outlines off, beautiful picture of John Rylands all lined up nicely on top of each other. So we can go back to the Qing's scroll slides, tiles, sorry, and we can do the same thing here. So with this one again, I can drag it around and we start to get a computation of the best one. And I know that it's roughly about there approximately. And then if we turn it back on, the two start to align up, and you get it roughly in the right place. It probably should be about there. Again, here's one I made earlier. Let's just speed things a little up a bit. If we put on the difference there, go across like that. Now you can see here, because these have been taken as 4 individual photos, they're never going to be perfect. There'll always be pixel differences between the 2 of them. But it means that we can get them close enough by calculating these, that when I turn the difference off, turn the outline off, you get a nice smooth image across. Now what's interesting here is that some people will look at it and say, but you can see the lines. You know, there's lines all the way along this. But what's interesting is that actually those lines are not where the tiles are. So those lines are lines on the actual scroll itself. That one in particular is interesting because it can look like there's a line going down there when it's turned off, but actually when it's turned on, you can see there is separate from there. So this is how we went about creating this. And the end result, finished product, displays like this. And this means that we have the entire scroll that we can move around. Now you can see here just how big this scroll is. This is a very, 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 very long scroll, you know, and we go, and then some, and still we go. So this is a huge, huge scroll, but it gives us the advantage that despite the fact it's so large, we can still zoom right in, right in, right in, and get really detailed information about this scroll that doesn't all have to be stored on your computer. It can just be brought down as the individual tiles. We put some hotspots on it as well. Here's a photo of the emperor, well, drawing, I should say, of the emperor. You can't actually see the emperor because he's hidden inside a box, but apparently he's in there. I'm reliably informed. And we made it so that if you click on the hotspots, it will tell you about that particular thing that you're looking at. And you could pick any of these. Some drums there, tells you about the drums. And this is a good way of making this kiosk interactive and available for people to browse rather than having to look at a massive 24-meter long scroll. So so that's all of the stuff that I had to show on that, and I will stop my sharing, and thank you very much.
Well, all right. Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Ian. Pardon the faux pas in the introduction. Ian was first. We're going to move on now. Again, I'm Daniel Lewin from CHM, from Computer History Museum. Heidi Quicksilver and I will present now, and I'm going to turn it over to Heidi. She's got some control over the materials, and she and I will spend a few minutes giving you an update on our view of a 21st century museum. So let me kick things off briefly, Heidi, if you move on. The Computer History Museum is a museum that's been around actually for quite some time. We do have and steward the foremost collection of historical artifacts, oral histories, and really an incomparable collection of computing, frankly, harkening back several thousand years. There are some early counting machines and things that are part of the collection, but most importantly, for the modern world, focused on the microprocessor and the computing revolution as we quote unquote think about it, beginning with mainframes and then now evolving into the woodwork as well as our pockets. We evolved our mission over the last few years. We'll continue to collect and preserve. That's obviously part of our mandate. But we're focusing much more so on decoding the computing past as it relates to the digital present, which is a moving target, which allows us to maintain relevance and focus on audience interest. And in particular, we have a belief system that I discussed with the trustees when I started, which is we could say Computer History Museum, CHM, or we could also say Computing, Humanity, and Meaning. And the lens that we look at things through should be about what it means to be human in a world that does not exist without computing. So it's kind of a coffee or tea moment where just about everyone on the planet drinks coffee or tea, yet they go to places, special places to imbibe, and they don't necessarily have to. So let's move on. So with that in mind, you know, the history of the museum goes back to Boston, founded by one of the early pioneers of the mainframe mini computer era, Gordon Bell, who is still on our board, he and his wife, Gwen. And that collection moved to the Bay Area, San Francisco, Silicon Valley area in late 90s. And in 2002, the first version of CHM, the museum itself, was opened at the corner of Highway 101, where the semiconductor was first birthed by Shockley. We're surrounded by the Google headquarters. We have a 7.5-acre property there. You can see the essence of our collection. In particular, while they're available, they haven't really been unleashed in any particular way. The oral histories of the tech pioneers, and then, you know, scores and scores and dozens of amazing events that have been collected interactively over time. About 1% is on display. This is an essence of the story. We also have two other buildings in the Bay Area behind our primary one, which you see in the reflection of behind me in the screen. That's our primary building. We have a massive research archive library we call the Shustak Research Library. Len Shustak was the founder of the museum in the Bay Area. And again, you can see, I won't read, you know, a massive collection of objects, software titles, oral histories. We also partner with many corporations and have two notable collections working with Cisco Systems and Google. We have the Founders Collection. We're working with a number of others as well. There are an extraordinary number of inquiries, particularly these days as people are appreciating more and more that life does not exist without computing. So that's been part of our mandate to evolve our mission and purpose, which leads to our belief in this 21st century museum concept. So we can move on. In preparing for that, we sat with the trustees. I've been around about 4 years. Frankly, I don't come from the museum industry. I come from the technology industry, where I've been involved since really the late 1970s, early 1980s. And we really started with the audience. We recognized that, you know, our audience was coming to Silicon Valley, the physical building, with an interest in sort of appreciating and understanding, you know, what makes Silicon Valley. And inevitably they would come and visit, and still do come and visit our museum. But we had not spent any significant time in the first two phases of the museum thinking through how to reach people outside of the museum. And so this notion of collections and access, and then the underpinning of the technical innovation that would be required for us to build the branches, if you will, to reach people wherever they are, using technology in local language in real time, is really the concept behind things. And we've been working very, very hard on that to consider, you know, how we go about it over the last 3 or 4 years. And we've had great support from a number of corporations and foundations to help us do that, weathering the storm like all of you through the pandemic. So with that, we've been busy. for the last 3 years. You can see we really looked at things from scratch. We really had some basic work to do at the institution, from rethinking our website, which was a very early website for the museum field, but was not modern, was not able to effectively reach people on the devices that they were operating from and searching from. And we've done a massive amount of work on the infrastructure side to put us where we are today. And so with that in mind, because really the foundation matters, and we've had a good fortune of, again, outreach to corporate partners. It's just our community is filled with that. And in terms of my background, spending nearly 40 years in this industry with a number of companies in Silicon Valley, but also my last 17 years at Microsoft, we were able to reach back out and understand the technical infrastructure that was available. And then Heidi will pick up from here and carry on about what we're calling Open CHM and how we're moving forward with this architecture that we think will be a good contribution for, obviously, for our own use case, but also for others in the field.
Thank you, Daniel. As Daniel was saying earlier, the Computer History Museum has been doing a lot to get their house in order. I think that from the last slide, you saw that a lot of work has been done up until this point. The thing that we've been discussing internally is what exactly is our opportunity to contribute to the museum community at large. And the thing that we keep focusing on is the fact that we are unique as the Computer History Museum, in the sense of not just our location, but our partners and our unique expertise in the area of technology, and using that in order to help the museum community as a whole. So how can we use our unique expertise and location and partners to contribute to the bigger picture? And the answer to that, and our vision for that, is what we're calling Open CHM. So Open CHM is first and foremost a technology framework for how the Computer History Museum is planning to open our collections and our systems to reach millions of people and increase user engagement. As Daniel mentioned, it is the platform has been laid over the last 3 years with systems, et cetera, in order to get us to the point of now figuring out what does our future look like? How do we use what we have in order to reach millions and increase our engagement? Secondarily, Open CHM is a philosophy. So it is going to embody how we think about our systems and processes to enable us to create an open architecture that we'll share with the world museum community. And the key to that, and I think I've heard it in a handful of sessions even before this one, is a lot of people saying, we don't have technology, we don't have IT teams, we don't have the architecture, we don't have a systems architect in order to figure that out for us. So one of the key things that Open CHM and the Computer History Museum is going to embark on is creating that as something that we can share with the museum community worldwide. So I don't want you to think that we aren't thinking about our collection, or that we aren't thinking about a dam system as we are speaking at Henry Stewart. We are thinking about our collections management system. We are thinking about our media. We're thinking about our data, but we're thinking also about a bigger picture. So one of the focuses that we have right now for our online collection is, as we are currently implementing a collections management system and a new digital asset management system, is what does it look like for us to open up those systems to outside users. The way that we're operating today, we have curated stories, and our curators at CHM or our archivists or our marketing professionals are creating experiences using our media and our data and our stories and pushing them out to the world. So what we see as the view for tomorrow, for the 21st Century Museum, is that we have the ability for people to access our collection in whatever way they want to, so that we can create power tools that will exist for people to create their own stories using our data and media. But we'll also have very robust APIs so that the developer community can dive into our data and our media and create things that maybe we've never even thought of. And something that I think is very exciting for the future is that we know our stories, we have stories to tell, we have curators who can absolutely tell very interesting stories and specific stories, but what about the bigger picture? What if we start connecting our data with data from other organizations? What else can be done, I think, is the way that we're thinking about this. So the key to all of this that we're looking at is building everything that we need in a modern cloud architecture. We are looking at our collections management, we are looking at our digital asset management, but beyond that, from a system architecture standpoint, we are looking at absolutely everything. We're looking at how all of our systems combine with each other and talk to each other and live together in a cloud native architecture, so that we can share what we learn and what we architect with the entire museum community. So if we get this right, when we get this right, we will be able to share what we've architected with organizations worldwide who maybe don't have the IT team or a system architect in order to help them figure it out. So that is the basic basis of our contribution to the museum community using OpenCHM. The idea is the modular part of this, I think, is also going to be very key. There are systems that we're going to use and systems that we're going to put in place because those systems work for CHM. However, in this architecture, we are hoping and we are thinking that whatever ticketing system you may use or whatever asset management system you may use, you should also be able to plug that into the architecture and make that work for your organization, with the understanding that not every organization is going to be using exactly the same tools. So we're not going to be able to build this by ourselves, which is, I think, a very key component. Right now, we are working with some very specific partners and open to more partners. This is a complex journey and it's going to require some help. So we have a very nice donation from the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. We're partnering with Microsoft and Terencia on the first part of our journey. Microsoft, everything that we're building is going to exist in the Microsoft cloud, which I think is exciting. And we're working with Terencia right now on our CMS and DAMS implementation, along with some other partners. So to wrap up, this is where we're at right now. We're at the very beginning of a really interesting 5-year timeline with our DAMS and CMS implementation and the understanding of opening up our collection and our data with power tools and with a developer portal and with the ability for other people to mine information and data and build whatever they can and want with whatever we can put out there. Final thoughts, I'm running out of time, sorry. We are thinking globally. So the biggest thing that I have while we're implementing all of these things that we're implementing, when I think about the museum community, I think a lot about what's right around me, and I'm taking a step back from that. We are taking a step back from that, and we are thinking about our global reach. There are museums everywhere. And I think museums everywhere are going to benefit from this reference architecture that we're going to make publicly available. One of the biggest things about thinking globally is language translation. Language translation for our platform, our content, and our architecture is going to be key for global access to what we are hoping to contribute to the museum community. Machine learning and AI is going to help us with that, and I think we need to let it. It's getting better every single day. Is it going to be perfect? No, but in a lot of instances, is that okay? Yes, I think it is. We are not specific about the audience also for our power tools and our developer portal. We know that educators and researchers are probably going to dive in and use this before a lot of other people, but we are excited to see what everyone's going to be able to do with our data and our media, as well as the architecture that we're providing. And that's it.
Well, thank you, Heidi. Maybe Pete and Ian will join and take a look at some of the questions from the audience. I think one of the first questions is for Ian or Pete. Tell us a little bit about the initial response, the reaction to using the tool and the scroll viewer, because I think it was sort of fascinating. What were the use cases? How did people take advantage of it?
Hi, thanks. Yeah, can you hear me okay? I can't stop.
Yeah, you're all set.
For reason. It goes to say, but hopefully you can hear me at least. Oh, here we go. Okay, thanks, Melly. Yeah, so it's interesting. We don't tend to get a lot of the sort of direct public feedback for our digital exhibitions. We're not usually asked to kind of capture direct user feedback. But what we did in terms of this particular instance, we got a lot of feedback from the museum curators and other staff in other museums as well that saw it. And these the experiences we develop are usually very just one-off. They're there for the 6-month period of the exhibition, and they'll kind of get replaced by something else. But immediately we were sort of contacted by a range of people who said, "This is great. Can we please use it on our other scroll that we've got? It might not be a 20 meter one." But
Right.
We had requests. So one of our other cultural institutions at the university is Manchester Museum, and they have a China gallery as well. And they were interested in having it as a permanent exhibit. But then they wanted it to be sort of redeveloped in some senses, because the kind of fonts and graphics didn't match up with the rest of their fonts. So there was kind of lots of potential issues for reuse, which Pete might want to go into a little bit. But we had a lot of enthusiasm in terms of, can we embed this in some of our other systems? I mean, our digital collections platform itself. Somebody said, can we not just embed the viewer as a permanent part of that, so somebody can go in as well as seeing the images and metadata actually through the scroll? So there's still lots for us to think about in terms of how we can reuse it and exploit it. But generally, there was a lot of interest in how useful it was as an application, and the kind of potential, other use cases for rolling it out to other areas. Pete, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, go ahead, Pete.
Yeah, the only thing I think I'd add on to that, everything Ian says is completely true. We did get a lot of people saying, can I use it for my scroll? Or not necessarily scroll, but whatever it be, something large that they wanted to digitize. And the answer to that, is complicated. In principle, the overlapping idea and calculating where different tiles are can be extended to any image. I gave the example of the photo of John Rylands I used as part of my demonstration. So in principle, yes, you can use it for other things, but the slight caveat with all of this is that firstly, your photos have to have been taken on a rig which roughly gets them the same size and the same orientation and the same position. If it's just somebody taking photos of a camera, not much chance of that happening. And secondly, the other caveat on it is that, as Ian mentioned right at the very start of the presentation, we didn't have a lot of time to do this. So this was sort of held together with elastic bands and paper clips to an extent. And that means that although in principle the technology should work for other things, in actuality, it's fairly hard-coded for the Qing scroll, this particular one.
Got it. But maybe some of the algorithms or some of the pieces that you use to parse things could be repurposed into another type of a viewer. Is that kind of
certainly in principle, yes.
Yeah, in principle, that would make a lot of sense. Heidi, any question for you about, you know, the sense of the use case for these power tools or the things that you're, you know, presenting as open access? I think that is, you know, part of the vision of OpenCHM was that let's open it up to others, historians and researchers and others that want to look at the history and the underlying stories behind the technology. Can you speak a little bit to that about the benefits of the tools?
Yeah, for sure. I think open access is a very particular topic that some museums are doing really well, and I feel like a lot of those museums are large museums with large teams and developers and engineers and people that can make tools like APIs and power tools or things like that accessible for different ways for people to engage with or discover things within their collections or their data. The interesting thing about OpenCHM is building these tools so that other organizations who may not have those engineers and those developers to build these one-off things for their particular museum, to build something for the community to use as a tool, I think is a very exciting part of OpenCHM. The idea that people want to dive into our collection more than just viewing something as an online collection, I think we have a definite particular audience in mind, which is developers, but also researchers and educators, etc. But I think, as I mentioned, the thing that I'm super excited about is to see who else uses it. I think some of the things that we've learned from open access at other organizations is, you know, what does it look like when Hollywood dives into a public, like what's publicly accessible at the Cleveland Art Museum or something like that. Even the use cases that we haven't thought about yet. And I think that there's going to be a lot of people that are going to surprise us. And I'm excited to see who that is and what they do with it.
Yeah. Just to put a little comment on that, as I was joining the museum and working with the trustees to think about what it would mean for this institution to be a lasting institution, given the rapid progress of technology, these AR, VR systems, you know, the language translation capability in real time, off the shelf, oral histories that we have of the stories behind the inventors, the motivation for their, you know, their particular solution or product. Unleashing that was a huge conceptual challenge. And so the discussion we had among the trustees and others was to say, more or less to Heidi's point, if not us, we're the Computer History Museum, we should do this. And the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, for those I'm sure generally familiar with Moore's Law, happens to be nearby, and they are a good benefactor of the science-oriented institutions in the greater San Francisco Bay Area. And, you know, we presented our concepts to them, and they gave us some seed resources and managed and watched our progress and continue to feed us with a second tranche of a resource that lets us continue this work. So to Heidi's point, it's a long journey. You saw the timeline of, we can kind of see out 3 to 5 years given the pace of development. But ideally, it will be a unique value proposition for us and a benefit to the broader institutional community that, as Heidi said, doesn't have the resource capability to build from scratch. But we will document and keep this alive and living and breathing and look for contributions from others. So thank you all for that. I think we're out of time on this session. I want to thank Pete and Ian and Heidi and all of those in the audience. We'll appreciate. Next up is the final session with the Carnegie Science Center to learn about combining the physical and digital to create a new perspective. And I will see you all shortly. Thank you so much.